morning, everybody. I'm Susan Howards, a local attorney in Brookline with a focus on domestic violence, sexual harassment, and discrimination. This is Brookline Cable Access's award-winning television show devoted to domestic violence, gender discrimination, sexual harassment, elder abuse. As today, our guest is very special. It's attorney Annika Bockius-Suwyn from DangerLaw. Good morning, Annika.
Good morning.
Would you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you went to law school, and what you do?
Sure. So I grew up in the South and came up to Philadelphia at Swarthmore College for my undergrad. Then kept coming north. My mom teases me I keep coming up I-95 and I'll be in Maine any day now to go to BU Law. After BU, I was a clerk for the Probate and Family Court in Eastern Massachusetts, and then I ended up at DangerLaw, which is a firm in Newton. It's in Newtonville, right by the Pike. I do estate planning and estate administration. The rest of the firm does family law and small business. We're really focused on, we call it asset protection, making sure that the things you love are passed on to the people you love. And we have a diverse staff, and we're committed to serving a diverse clientele, both racially, economically, and we have a specific focus on the LGBTQ community, as about half of us identify with that community.
And you are also co-chair of the board of the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. Am I correct?
Yep, I am. This year, we're coming into another year, so hopefully I'll be reelected.
Well, I hope.
And I also serve as the co-chair for the fundraising committee for GLAAD's Spirit of Justice dinner. So that's a GLBTQ advocates and defenders. It is a civil rights law firm downtown that's a 501c3 and has done just phenomenal work around LGBTQ rights. They argued marriage here in Massachusetts, and then they argued it on the national level as well. So.
Wow. And I know you're not going to say this, but you're also recognized as a Massachusetts super lawyer. Am I correct?
That is correct, yes.
I star in the estate planning and probate category?
Yes.
So
yes.
I would say you're on the move. Am I right?
I'm trying.
Well, you're obviously successful. Annika, have you seen any changes, how should I say this, in the LGBTQ community during COVID? Is there anything that jumps out at you that we should be paying attention to?
The LGBTQ community is particularly vulnerable. They're unlikely to seek medical treatment because of harassment and discrimination from the medical community. So much like Black Americans and other minorities in this country, they already have a ton of underlying conditions. Also, the LGBTQ youth make up almost half of the of the homeless youth in the United States,
Wow.
Despite being about at the most 10% of the population, due to being kicked out and other sort of family issues. So being on the streets puts them at particular vulnerabilities at this time with COVID and the pandemic. So that's really where it's coming up, is that there's already a tense relationship with the medical community for the LGBTQ community, and this is really just exacerbating it.
When you say tense relationship, do you feel comfortable, because this is the first time I've heard of this, shame on me. Do you feel comfortable explaining what that tension is? And are there particular, I don't want you to name hospitals, but are there particular areas the community should avoid? And are there particular areas they should seek out where there is a welcome? That's 4 questions.
Yeah, so I don't know that I can speak to specifics. I'm a cisgender white woman, so and we're here in Massachusetts, so when I walk into the doctor and tell her I have a wife, for the most part, it's not really a problem. I don't feel uncomfortable. It tends to be more prevalent. There's more homophobia for just gay men in general, for trans people, for people of color who for polyamorous people, for people who are, just not what everyone's expecting when you walk into the doctor's office. If you're bisexual, there's a lot of stigma around that where people don't understand. And so for doctors, this is such a minor thing, and I'm so privileged, but I go into the doctor and a nurse, my wife's name is Josephine, and the nurse just looked at my file real quick and said, "Oh, so you're still with your husband, Joseph?" And I was like, that feels terrible. And it's such a minor thing, and it's such an easy mistake, but it was going off of all the presumptions she had, which were not cruel presumptions. They were not, there was no malice behind it, but there was simply no thought behind it. There was no open mind to just sort of sticking to gender neutral, looking at what was going in front of them. So
what did you do in that situation, if I may ask? Did you confront it? Did you respond? Or did you just let it go and say, okay, later?
Oh, I very simply just said, actually, it's my wife, her name is Josephine, and just pushed past it. Yeah.
And after that, things sort of settled down or not?
Yeah, for sure. And this was the nurse. My doctor, who I have more of a relationship with, is kind of much better about all of that. And again, this is such a minor thing compared to what people really, come up against. Gay men, their primary care doctors feel like they're not equipped to prescribe them PrEP, which is prophylactic for HIV. It's a daily pill that has essentially eliminated transmission of HIV. If you're taking it regularly, you will, even if you're HIV positive, you will not transmit, and if you are HIV negative, you will not get it.
So Annika, do we have hope that maybe COVID will have a pill like that soon?
I can't speak to that. But there's no reason a primary care, besides homophobia and discomfort talking about men having sex, there's no reason a primary care doctor can't prescribe it, just like my primary care doctor prescribes, birth control or, any sort of regular things you don't need to go to a specific doctor for that. But many primary care doctors are uncomfortable talking about a drug that could essentially end the HIV epidemic within a generation. Wow,
wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be?
So that's sort of the effect that people have. And then when you put into, if you're transgender, getting misgendered at the doctor's office, getting asked invasive questions about your genitalia, which has nothing to do with your heart rate or your blood pressure or anything like that, it makes people not go to the doctor as often as they should. It makes people stop, makes people not live how people who think of themselves as normal usually live, which means they have underlying conditions that make them even more susceptible to COVID.
Wow. We did do a show with Transgender, and I will send you the link to that. You might be interested in it.
Wonderful.
How do you make your clients and employees feel comfortable in who they are and how they want to present, how they want to be perceived? Let me put it that way.
Yeah, so for me, the most important thing is education. Not all of us are LGBTQ in the firm. But the straight members of our firm have really put in the effort, and even the cisgender lesbians in the firm have really put in the effort to learn and to not rely upon the people who are vulnerable to teach them. So to seek out other resources. And the most important thing I think people in general can do is to become comfortable with the language, to not stumble, to not get uncomfortable when they talk about these things, because there's nothing inherently uncomfortable about them. I think there's a lot of ingrained homophobia that's not unkind, but because it's not spoken of in general, then people stumble over it. I know people who have trouble saying the word lesbian. There's nothing wrong with the word lesbian. It's not dirty. It's my identity. It's many people's identity. So to become familiar with who falls into the umbrella of the LGBTQ community and what it means, so that you don't sit there and asked too many questions, because, you know, it feels terrible to be interrogated about your identity, you know, by someone who is more normative. So instead, you seek out other resources, you know, do some reading on the internet. PFLAG and GLAAD are great resources that have.
I'm sorry, what is PFLAG?
PFLAG is it's a national organization, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And it is really focused on educating parents. So it started on sort of a high school, middle school level, and it has now kind of evolved for everyone. So it started for parents, now it does workplaces as well, about what it means to be gay, the different language around it, or trans, or queer in any way. And then it also, so the PFLAG is great because their literature is really focused on educating straight people and cisgender people about all of these things in a way that, you know, then PFLAG has really taken on the role of educating people so that the burden of education doesn't fall upon the oppressed minority.
Wow. What does that stand for? LGBTQIA. Thank you. Sorry, I have to ask basic questions.
No, it's totally fine. I'm happy to talk about that. So the acronym LGBTQIA+, it evolves very often. So I understand it's hard to keep up with, but right now it's L is lesbian, G is gay, B is bisexual or pansexual. They mean interchangeably the same thing. Bisexual is a little older as an identity. That's why it gets a B in the acronym. T is transgender. So that includes both male to female, female to male, and non-binary transgender people, which we can talk a little bit about.
Please do, yeah.
Yeah. Q stands for queer or questioning. And queer is an umbrella term for people who feel like they fall within the LGBTQ community, but don't necessarily identify with any of the specific other letters. I will say, given its history as a slur, it's a word that academics use. It's the academic queer theory is an academic theory. But outside of academics, it's best if you let people within the community use that word, and people outside of the community should probably stick to LGBTQ or gay, just given the history of queer as a slur. The I stands for intersex. It's almost 2% of the population are born with genitals out or reproductive parts that don't necessarily match what we put into the categories of male or female.
Wow.
It could be that there's a mixture of them. It could be that they're ambiguous. There's actually a lot of problematic in history of doctors fixing a child's genitals at birth and assigning them a gender based on, oh, I can make this look a lot like a penis, or, oh, I can make this look a lot like a vulva. And there's a rising movement to leave children how they are until they can express consent to any kind of reconstructive surgery, which is what they were doing on newborns on a highly regular basis. So that's what the I is. A stands for asexual or aromantic. These are people who either experience no sexual attraction or experience no romantic attraction to any gender, any presentation. And then the plus we always put on there because it's an ever-growing community as humans learn to have language to describe themselves and to find out that there are other people in the world who feel the way they do. Thanks, the internet has been a fabulous resource in that people can connect. So that's why we always put the plus on, because it's really a community is about coming together to fight the oppression that comes from having a heteronormative, cisgender normative world, and finding a way to be present in the world and have community.
Annika, what is cisgender? My ignorance.
So cisgender means that you agree with the gender you were assigned at birth. So we'll talk a little bit. So there's the difference between sex and gender. Sex is all about genitalia. It's, we believe that Doctors say that if you have a penis, that's your sex is male. Gender is about what's in your head. It's about how you feel. And it has nothing to do with your genitalia. So cisgender means when you were born, the doctor took a look at your genitalia, assigned you a gender, male or female, and you say, that's great, I agree. I've never felt like I'm anything other than what the doctor has said I am. So that's cisgender. It's the vast majority of the population. Transgender means that as you grew up, you realized that is not true. Just because your genitalia says one thing, your mind and your heart say something else. And that's really what's most important. And that's transgender. There is also a significant portion of the transgender community that does not identify as male or female. That's the non-binary. There's also sometimes called agender. And oftentimes non-binary people use gender-neutral pronouns, either they, them in the singular, or a whole host of other ones that people have invented. So we can talk a little bit about pronouns, but
yeah, what is the importance of pronouns? Again, my ignorance.
Yes, so pronouns are what makes people feel respected and human. You know what I mean? Let's see. So we use pronouns all the time. English is a gendered language. So we use them all the time. And if I'm a cisgender woman and if I walked into a room and someone repeatedly said, hello, sir, it's nice to see you, and then turned to someone else and said, this gentleman would like XYZ, that would feel very dehumanizing. It would feel like I was unseen, because that is not my preference. Those are not my pronouns. So by using the pronouns someone tells you, it is just affirming. It is affirming that you see them as a person. You know, the example I love to use is if somebody walked in and said, hey, my name is Robert, but I like to go by Bob. And you specifically, every time you spoke to them, said, hello, Robert. Hi, Robert. This is Robert. Despite the fact that he said, I really prefer to go by Bob, that would be very disrespectful. You would be going against the very specific, clear, easy request that someone has made of you. Now, in society, we are programmed to see certain people with certain pronouns. So it may not be as easy as Bob and Robert, but it only takes a little bit of effort that if someone says, my pronouns are she, her, hers, regardless of what you see in front of your face, you use those pronouns because they're a person. And, you know, she deserves to be treated as a person, and anything else is very othering and dehumanizing.
How do you ask for sensitive information from, say, new clients? And
Yes.
do you?
Yes.
Is it necessary in estate planning for you to ask for sensitive information?
It can be. So, you know, first of all, my intake form asks for people's pronouns, but it also asks for the gender on their government ID. So let's talk about, especially these uncomfortable questions can especially come up for transgender people. I think for gay people, the best thing you can do is and for everyone, because you don't know who could be gay and you don't know who could be trans or anything, is to keep as much as possible your language gender neutral. Don't ask about someone's wife or husband unless they've already told you the gender of their spouse. Say, are you married? What's your spouse's name? What are your spouse's pronouns? Your children instead of your son or daughter, your mother, your parent instead of your mother or your father. You know, that's the best way to avoid any assumptions. And the assumptions are what can be very othering for people. In terms of the transgender community, I often do have to ask, what is your legal name? Because if they haven't done a legal name change, it may not be the name that they go by. And I need to know, because if they have property in their legal name, if they pass away, their death certificate will be in their legal name. So it does have to go into their documents. If they've gone through a legal name change and all of their property is in their new name, I don't actually have to know their, what is called in the trans community, dead name. The name they were born with is called a dead name, and many trans people do not, it's very painful to hear that. So I often ask for their legal name, and if their legal name is their name they currently go by, great. If it's not, I do have to note it. I also ask for people what the gender marker on their government ID is. So in Massachusetts, you can now have what's an X marker, a male marker, and a female marker. So for non-binary people, they put X. For a male, M, and for female, F. And that's important.
Hey, Annika, isn't that profiling?
What do you mean?
Well, I'm not going to get into racial profiling, but by putting an M, F, or an X, why is that necessary? Are you talking about driver's licenses?
It's on the driver's license, yeah.
Why is that necessary?
I do not know why it is necessary on the current driver's license. I know that it was a big fight in Massachusetts just to get an X rather than an M or an F. I think it's for purposes of identification to make sure that, I don't know, but I do have to know for certain forms and things like that. So I just need to know what their legal ID says. As long as it's a requirement to have one, I need to know what it says. And you do have to put gender on your driver's license.
I want to ask a question. Have you seen an uptick in discrimination during this time, not just COVID, but even given the protests that are going on now due to Mr. Floyd's untimely murder? Have you seen anything in your practice that puts you on alert? Wow, we really need to be on top of things.
It doesn't really come up in my practice very much, thankfully. Here in estate planning is pretty far removed from the protests. But in life, you know, the trans people of color have often been on the front lines of these things. And if you are a trans person who gets arrested by the police, the violence levels are off the charts that they suffer at the hands of the police for being gender non-conforming. Oftentimes, if you're a transgender woman, which means you were assigned male at birth, but you know that you are a woman, if you have not gone through a transition legally and changed your gender legally, the police will put you in a men's prison despite the fact that you are a woman and you present in every way as a woman, which is an incredibly dangerous thing to do.
Very.
So often trans women of color and were on the front lines of the Stonewall riots, which have been largely credited with sparking the modern LGBTQ rights movement. And they've been on the front lines of every protest for generations, and they have even more to lose in terms of violence than the rest of us when confronting the police. So that's really what I've seen, not in my practice specifically, but within my community.
But you know, it isn't the police who put you in prison, it's the courts. And we've run into issues with educating judges and court personnel, and we've been quasi-successful on different aspects of domestic violence with different kinds of communities. And I'm just wondering if any education of court personnel, from judges to court officers to clerks to probation officers, is going on for the LGBTQIA community. Do you know of any education or trainings?
I don't know of any specifically going on right now. I know that there are several public defenders who are LGBTQ who are doing their best to educate their communities, including prosecutors, about the LGBTQ community. You know, right now the courts are barely functioning.
They're not
getting any. I mean, well, my court, the probate court, is open for emergencies, and they are at a glacial pace processing administrative things. But because of that, I don't know of any current trainings going on. I know that, in Massachusetts, there's been more law recently about putting people in the jail or the prison that fits their gender presentation. But And so we're further along than a lot of states, but obviously we're not perfect.
Annika, in the few minutes we have, how does somebody apologize for making an error in addressing a member of the community? What would be the best? Because I'm sorry doesn't cut it.
No, well, I think it does. So what's really
good.
important, I think, from an apology standpoint is to be matter of fact and kind. So if you mess up someone's pronouns and they correct you, or you realize you've made a mistake, you just say, I'm sorry, correct yourself. So if you use the wrong pronoun, say, I'm sorry, use the correct pronoun and move on. Because what's really difficult is when you make a big thing out of it. Because if you make a big thing out of it, then the person who has been hurt by your error is on the spot to make you feel better. It becomes about you. So I find that the absolute best option is to be really matter of fact, address it, and move on with pretty much everything when it comes to this community. You know, the most important thing, what all of my clients say when they come to me is, we picked you because we wanted to feel normal.
Oh, what a tribute to you.
Well, thank you. And I get to say, yes, I just had 7 clients just like you last week. And you're boring for me, which is helpful for them. So I think the most important thing is to be educated, and you're going to make mistakes. Society has programmed us one way, and it's hard to overcome that programming. But what's important is that you try. An effort is always going to make a huge difference for people. And that you move forward and not make this huge deal out of this terrible error you've made. You know, mistakes happen. I misgender cis people all the time because my pronouns get mixed up coming out of my mouth. It's the same thing. Just apologize, move on. And when you do this, if you take any of these steps of education, you can make either you recruit and retain talent on the employment side from the LGBTQ community, or even people who have family members, loved ones who are within the LGBTQ community.
Right.
You know, a lot of times I have colleagues in the estate planning community, they're like, I don't think I have any gay clients. And I'm like, well, first of all, you're not asking the right questions. Second of all, but what about their kids? What about their grandkids? What about their siblings? And every time you can demonstrate an awareness that not everyone is a straight cisgender person, it's going to win you points. It's going to show that you are thinking more broadly. You're going to retain talent, and you're going to attract clients. Because the LGBTQ community loves to refer to people who have made them feel accepted and not weird. So,
Annika, that's a good line to end on, because I think anybody loves to refer to people who are welcoming, embracing, and have a little understanding, maybe not as much as they should, but are open to having it. Annika Bockius-Suwyn, I hope I did better. I want to thank you so much for being on the show today from DangerLaw. And just really quickly, how can people contact you if they would like to?
Sure. So the best way is to go to dangerlaw.com. It's all one word. It's danger, like you're in danger. And then also our number at the office is 617-340-3231. But really the website is the best way, because then you don't have to remember any numbers. Just remember DangerLaw and come talk to us. I'm happy to talk to anyone, even if it's just about more questions that you have about the LGBTQ community. I know I earlier said, don't ask people within the community, but I'm volunteering. I'm offering myself up as a resource.
Thank you so much. And I hope that we'll see you again. Please stay safe and stay on top of the situation. We need you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.